Hi class, and welcome to Comparative Politics. This is your week 11 Thursday lecture. We're looking at our first specific country here in the third and final unit of our course, the less developed nations, the global south, or just to have some good old fun, the third world. Okay. I mentioned in my previous lecture, and you should have noticed in your review questions for 11.1, that there's a real tension in these third world nations between capitalism and communism. And I mentioned that I think you find this coming out because there was a competitive influence in the Cold War between the United States and the Russians to gain influence over these regions and to shape world order in our American versus Russian favor. This theme should emerge as you study India. Okay, I'm trying to be really clear that this is one of the things that you should be seeing. My brief lecture today is going to be designed to make sure that you pick this up as you read the chapter. Now, as I think about India, one of the things that I think here is that we are going to see a double heritage, and this is like a double entendre, meaning there is a double meaning behind the concept that there is a double heritage to India. So we're going to see this manifesting in a couple of different ways, okay? One of the things that you should see is a tension, a cultural tension between the various influences in India. India is a large and diverse continent. It's a subcontinent. So one of the best ways to look at it as this is a nation with the size scope of something like the United States of America, Russia, or China. Okay, because of where it's situated, it was not itself a real, what's the best way to put this? It has always had outside influences coming in to settle this region, okay? In other words, it was not the cradle of civilization, but it's a place where we came from various directions, and the Muslim and Hindu tension is a good example of this. The ancient Indian and Asian peoples from the region have this sort of long-standing sort of Hindu tradition. There were Hindu empires which were going to dominate the Indian subcontinent from the time of its original settling up through about 1000 AD. At this point in time, Aryans from the northwest, from the Iranian region, are going to begin settling and impacting the region themselves. These were the Mughals. So the result of this today, some, 1,000 years after these tensions first begin to emerge, is that there's this religious heritage of both Hindus and Muslims in India. Now, the vast majority of Indians are Hindus, about 80%. 12% of the population are Muslims, and you'll notice this leaves about 8%. The majority of these are going to be Sikhs. Once a very peaceful people, they're now responsible for much of the religious infighting that occurs in some of India's provinces. So one of the first things that we need to understand out of the gate is that culturally speaking, this is a really diverse people. But with this said, there is a sort of one thing that we could see here in this tension. There is a history of empire, and what this means should be, much like Russia and China, a tendency or push towards, if not communism, at least a centralization of government and an authoritarian style of government. But again, with this said, we can also speak here of the more recent influences and this tension that I've already been speaking about between capitalism and communism. As your book will teach you, the last big influence is going to be the British into the region. Okay, so in one scope, you may see this as just a series of empires influencing the region. But I see this differently. I see this forming the backbone for a communist, what's going to emerge as a communist socialism bend in India. And the British are going to be providing a different, and again, a double meaning to all this double heritage stuff. The British provide a different influence here. Okay, when they begin to impose British parliamentary systems of government onto India, you're going to have sort of this very different impact. Capitalism begins to emerge here. Okay, even though your textbook portrays the civil service program as being like dominated by Brits, and you got to take the exams in London, it are Indians who are participating in this scheme, and they're going to begin to develop this sort of what's the best way of putting this? Capitalism and freedom, even in this filtered way, are going to impact the Indian subcontinent and the Indian government. Okay, so in many of the revolutionary era, when we go from the Ensign Mutiny, when the British very foolishly are using pig and cow oil, which manages to offend both Muslims and Hindus, in their new Ensign rifle, you have a rebellious movement here. Same thing is going to happen a little bit later with the tax on salt. Now, I mean, look, at this point, guys, slow down for a second. This is a bona fide American revolution here. The Brits are taxing salt exorbitantly. This is like the tax on tea. Response to this from the Indians, and here I'm talking Gandhi. One thing to be clear about, and your review questions get into this. Nehru and Mohandas Gandhi are going to sort of be the leaders of this revolutionary movement. Indira is not related to Mohandas Gandhi, so she's going to be a powerful and long-running prime minister, not related to Gandhi. Okay. Now, what your textbook should tell you is that from Gandhi, Mohandas, we're going to get this idea of freedom, of peacefulness, and in a lot of the ways he's going to supply this almost Americanness or Britishness in this revolutionary atmosphere to what's going on in India. On the other hand, his buddy, who's going to go on to be the first prime minister, Nehru, your book tells you that he's going to be bringing ideas of socialism and utopianism into this mix. So we have this interesting mix of socialism and good old Western British American style freedom beginning to emerge. Now, as this tension is going to play out over the Nehru is going to take power here with Indian independence here in the 1940s, right? As we proceed through into the present, the way that I would best summarize this is you see this in the early years under Indira Gandhi, more of a communist or socialist style atmosphere. As you get into her successor, Rajiv Gandhi, we begin to take more of a capitalist style atmosphere. Although, my goodness, her son is taking over after her. This is more like a dynastic Eastern Chinese or Russian thing, more so than a Western influence, I would say. Okay. Now, when you look at the policies that are coming out here, again, we find tensions coming from both places. The British deeply influence the formation of the present Indian government. They have a parliamentary system, which I believe I asked you to explain back to me. Their leader is a prime minister who they have an upper house and a lower house. The Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha. Okay, structured very, very similarly. 543 members of the lower house, and the prime minister is the majority leader out of. In many regards, it looks very, very similar institutionally to the British government. Look at what happens under Indira Gandhi, though. She puts together a 5-year plan. This is straight up a socialist thing. It's what they did in Russia and China. She's trying to get her economy to catch up through centralization of organization. When she experiences some pushback from Congress, Congress is her party. It is not, I don't mean Congress generally speaking, I mean the political Congress party. What does she do? She she uses an emergency clause to take absolute dictatorial control over Indian government. Again, this sounds like something that would happen in India and not the United States or Great Britain, right? Think about David Cameron in Britain last year. He loses the vote on the Brexit thing and resigns from government. He didn't use that as an opportunity to declare emergency rule and to take over the British government. So there's a cultural difference here, and I think that this double heritage that we're speaking of explains it. You see the institutions of the West, and in some sense a meaningful desire to fulfill those institutions, and on the other hand, this communist socialist influence and a desire to fulfill that, and to take some of the sort of authoritarian and dictatorial bends that go along with that. Now, long about the time the Soviet Union falls, and by the way, Indira, well, you'll read about this. Havel has already taught you about this. She's going to be murdered by some Sikhs who are upset at the way she's sort of strong-arming one of the regions in the north. And after her murder by Sikh bodyguards of hers, but again, a foolish sort of move here, her son is going to begin to take the market into a more privatized manner, and this is really going to help India flourish. Okay, so one of the things that I would caution, how I would encourage you to interpret this is, where you see a democratic veneer in Russia and a persistence for communism in China, although they do have some market tendencies in their economy, private market tendencies. You see in India here a little bit of a difference. Because of this double heritage, they're going to go more whole hog towards privatization and capitalism from 1990 to the present. And indeed, when you looked at our scores, right, they're one of the more free countries today. Their institutions are going to reflect this. I'll talk about this in just a second, but their private economy also reflects this. They're catching up, you might say, better than the Russians or the Chinese. Now again, under the 5-year plans of Indira Gandhi, you had a one-party system, the Congress Party. Today, India's Prime Minister Modi comes out of the BJP party. Okay, so again, this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, in a sense, you have a one-party system in India. The Congress Party dominates for the longest time, although recently they have become competitive, and BJP does win elections. You've had 2 presidents now, or prime ministers, majority governments come out of the BJP. The other edge of this is there is a lot of diversity and a lot of competition electorally in India. When these 2 parties form governments, they usually do so with a large majority coalition. In 2004, 42 parties won seat. 42 parties, different political parties, won seats in the Indian government. Okay, you've got 543 seats in the lower house, so this is how this happens. In 2009, 37 parties won seats in the lower house. Okay, so what this means is that when the BJP puts a coalition together, it's a wide-ranging coalition, and same for Congress in recent years. By the way, understand the left-right tension here. Congress tends to be more of a socialist type party. BJP has more of a nationalistic, more conservative, more private market economy elements to it. Okay. Modi, and when I say nationalistic, for instance, Modi did not have, he was the former governor of Gujarat. I'm going to ask you to tell me in one of your review questions what happened here. He had no problem suppressing quite violently a sort of rebellion movement by the minority Sikh population here. So this tendency is still here. So there is the proclivity here for sort of the violent suppression of political opposition. So although you see a 70 in those Freedom House scores, there are some beneath the surface pieces of evidence in India that suggest that it is not that simple. Okay. Okay. I'm getting near the conclusion of my lecture here, and I have just about a minute. So to sort of summarize, I think the way I've spelled this out is there's a double heritage and tendencies coming from both the communism and the capitalist worlds. And they're really colliding in India. I hope you're able to see this as you get through this particular lesson. Okay, if you're answering your questions well, you're explaining both, hey, there's a capitalist push here, a democratic push here, and over here I see a centralization push. All right, India is a case where you really should clearly see both sides. I also want to point out in conclusion, India is a place in the third world that we can do some good because the double heritage means the tensions towards democracy are just as strong or stronger, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union. Modi is a guy that we can work with. This isn't China. This is perhaps the nation that that can upend order in the Pacific with America's help.